Now, I want to underscore for those of you who are with me live, and this is one of the benefits of joining me live, is I would love it as we're going through today, if you have any questions about what we are talking about, please post them in the comments or the chat. Let me know what your questions are about this topic so that we can make sure they get answered. The entire purpose of our conversation today is to give you information you can start using right away. Right. And so it's easier to do that if you've got questions, if I know what they are, so that I can answer those for you. Excellent. Again, love it as you're joining us. If you would say hello and if you'd let me know where you're from, that would be so much fun. All righty, let's dive in. We need to start with our little waiver, our little disclaimer. This information is meant for your education only. It is not meant to diagnose or prescribe. You are responsible for any results, good or bad, that result from using this information, right? You have choice here. You have choice. So welcome. Welcome. And again, I'd love it if you would introduce yourselves regardless of what platform you're with me on, so that, and just let me know maybe where you're from and if you have any background in iridology. It just makes it easier for me to fine-tune the presentation, to tweak it on the fly. We've got Faith with us on Instagram from South Carolina. Welcome, Faith. So good to have you with us today. Excellent. All righty. As we go through today, I will try to keep an eye on the questions box. So please, if you have questions about anything that we are talking about, please post it in the comments or in the chat, whichever platform you're with me on. And I will do my very best to answer that for you. When I figured out how to integrate iridology into my holistic health practice, it was quite a remarkable event. And you know, I'm actually going to turn on my camera. Hello there. Hello. It's good to see you. All righty. And so what we want to know as we're looking at this, because I've studied many kinds of iridology and they have different perspectives on the question of, do irides change? But as I started working with iridology, I came to some realizations of my own. As I started applying this information with my clients, I started to go, oh, that's not what I was taught, or, oh, that is what I was taught. And I started to sort the information that was working for me from the information that was not working for you. So as we do this, we want to look at, do irides change? Now, just want to add a little bit of background here. And that is that the purpose of doing iridology isn't necessarily to tell our client exactly what's going on in their body right now, right? That's called crystal ball iridology. When we do iridology properly, when we do it really well, it helps us to assess our client's needs more quickly. And that's a good thing because that helps me to integrate what I already know about nutrition and herbology and flower essences and EFT and all kinds of things. I can choose the right modality for my client at this point in time. Iridology helps me to be more accurate because it gives me an understanding of what my client's genetic structure is and what their dynamic chemistry is as well. It helps me to build better and faster rapport because when I'm using iridology, it actually is, yes, giving me some insight into their body, but it's also helping me to understand how their symptoms are related to their genetic structure, how their symptoms are related to their genetic chemistry, and it helps me to understand what questions I need to ask them to get better answers. And truly, iridology eliminates the need for an intake form, which is great. I've never had a client complain about not having to fill in one of those really stinking long questionnaires. And so this is very exciting that I can use iridology, and have been doing this for decades now, as my intake form. Right? Client comes in, hi, hello, how are you? What would you like my help with? That's as far as that goes. Then we start with the iridology and gathering more history. Are you on any meds? What surgeries have you had? Things like that, so that I can begin understanding what I'm seeing in the eyes to know what questions to ask to get a deeper understanding. So Iridology, again, helps me to integrate everything I know for modalities, and depending on what you have for modalities, it will absolutely help you with that as well. So how exactly does Iridology do this? Let's look at some eyeballs. That sound okay? Sound like a good idea? Now, for those of you who are on Instagram, I'm going to move my phone closer so you can see these images better. There we go. There we go. Feisty Herbalist, thanks for joining us in Zaziltot, sorry, I said that wrong. Welcome, I'm glad you're with us on Instagram as well. These are the iris photos of a client who came to me when he was in his 40s. These were taken with what was state-of-the-art equipment back then. It was an 8 megapixel digital camera. I know you're laughing, right? When you hear 8 megapixels, because that is certainly not state of the art right now. Most of our cell phones are stronger than that. But I want you to get a really close look at these photos and look at the shading that we see up here between about 10 o'clock and about 1:30. There's more shading here, but just past 3 o'clock down to about 3:30. There's more down here at about 6 o'clock. There's not so much in his left eye, but there is a little bit. It's just not as intense as it is in the right eye. Now, I want you to look at his pictures again. These are photos that we took of him about 18 months later. Now, as we look at these photos, I'm going to show you a side-by-side of one of the original photos and one of the before photos and one of the after photos. I'm going to want you to compare. I mean, even looking at this and looking at the shaded area, do you see a difference here? I also want you to notice this is a different camera. This is a 24 megapixel camera, where this has an incandescent ring flash. This has an LED flash. Okay, so difference in the quality and the color of the lighting, difference in the resolution. Now, this fellow did some work with me, and he's sort of on and off with his health consciousness. There's times when he's really on board and he's doing lots that's right, and there's times when he's really off board and his wife is calling and saying, I don't know what to do with them. And it's like, well, I don't know what to do with them either. He's not my husband. So when you look at these as the before photo and the after photo, what do you see that is different? What do you see that is different? I'd love to see some comments in the chat box. What do you see that is different? We'll give you just a moment. Again, the image on the left of your screen, these are the very same eye. The image on the left of your screen was taken 18 months before the image on the right. The image on the left was taken with an 8 megapixel camera with a incandescent ring flash. The image on the right was taken with a 24 megapixel with an LED flash. All right, so what are you thinking here? I need you to play with me in my sandbox and tell me, what do you see that is different? Whether you know iridology or not, what looks different here? Okay, so for those of you who are saying the image on the right looks clearer, it looks less blurry, less murky, you're absolutely right. It does look that way. When some of you are saying that it looks like he did some tremendous cleansing work, and I'm going to say, no, he didn't. What the darker part seems to have reduced. Zaziltot, thank you for that. They do look reduced, don't they? They do. They look reduced. I am going to suggest to you that that is appearance only, that the 8 megapixel tends to blur things, and the 24 megapixel makes things sharper. So the real difference here, and thank you so much for that, Zaziltot, I appreciate that input. The real difference here is that we changed the technology. I want you to, for a moment, to look at the skin tones. Notice how the skin tones on the image on the left of your screen look fleshier. On the right, they look pinker, more of a bluey pink. Even look at the whites of the eye. The whites here are whiter. Here, the whites are more pinky bluey, right? That is a tech problem. That is not that he cleansed. His eye isn't brighter because he cleansed. The definition here isn't because he did the right kind of work. I know this gentleman well. He probably did the right kind of work for about 4 weeks and then got bored and wandered away again, right? And that's because that's his pattern. So when we see this, this is one example of what you might see online where people are saying, this is my before, this is my after. Look at how things look different because I cleansed, because I used this particular herbal product, or because I've done something different with my life. When we compare skin tones and sclera colors, we usually find our discrepancy right there. And even just noting, is the flash the same, will tell us whether they've actually changed technology. And if they have, these are not accurate before and after pictures. What you probably already know is that in order for a science experiment to be valid, all of the parameters must be the same, which means the image on the left would have been, let me rephrase that. These images would have to have been taken with the exact same camera, set on the exact same ASA, shutter speed, focal stop or f-stop. Everything would have to be the same. If there were batteries in the camera, they would also have to have had the same amount of charge because the amount of charge affects how bright the flash is, right? So we need to remember that before and afters may not work. So the better question, that was bad grammar. The real question here, or the better question, is not do eyes change, but it's what changes can we see in irides and what do those changes mean? Because we do know that irides do change. We do know that. We also know that they don't change in the way that so many iridologists say they change. Now, I used to be guilty of that. When I first started iridology years ago, I would have said, not knowing anything about tech, that this eye was bluer because this person had done some cleansing and building. But now, knowing what I know about tech, now having owned several different cameras and doing before and after pictures with the same camera, I can tell you invariably that when we see pictures that are this different, it wasn't a cleanse, it was the equipment that changed. So I've been an iridologist for about 40 years now, and the first 10 of those were as what we call a North American iridologist. That is the type of iridology that says eyes change when you do diet, when you do lifestyle, when you do herbs, things like that. And so what we know that, and I was about ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one because I was not seeing my clients' eyes change. As I would put them through the paces of intense cleanses, of intense herbal programs, intense dietary corrections, we weren't seeing the eyes change at all. And just as I was about to leave iridology completely and just go chalk that up to experience, is when I came to learn about constitutional iridology. And this made more sense to me because it said the eyes don't change in response to what they do. The irides are genetically set, and that gives us understanding, and it just made so much sense. So I would like to take just a moment to introduce myself before we dive into this a little bit more. There's me bigger. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a master herbalist, natural nutrition clinical practitioner, certified iridologist, and a certified iridology instructor with IPA. I've been in practice since 1979, or been studying since 79, been in practice since 81. And so I've been doing this for 4 decades now. I'm the wife of 1, the mom of 7, and the grandma of 8. And I got into holistic healing originally all those decades ago because I had some health problems and the doctors were not able to help me understand why these problems were happening. They couldn't even help me understand what the problems were. They couldn't figure it out. And that was when I decided there's got to be more to being healthy than going to the doctor. And that's when I started investigating nutrition and herbology. Happened to meet the man I married. He was into the same things, only he was further ahead in the journey. He taught me what he knew, and I grabbed it and I ran. And I have never looked back. So this is what I did. Instead of finishing university, I've got 4 years of university credits, not enough in any one major to have a university degree, but I have lots of credentials in holistic health. Over the years, I've written several books that I've self-authored and self-published: Pregnancy Naturally, The Herbal Birth Kit Handbook, Healthy Kids Naturally, The Essential Guide to Nature Sunshine Products, Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and 2. And my most recent writing was the Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology textbook, which is the textbook that we use in the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System course. And I've designed and taught a lot of courses. Years ago, I designed a 20-hour Level 1 herbology, which was designed to teach people, because that was way back. We're talking in the early 80s, before herbs were a big thing, and it was still kind of underground and kind of woo-woo, right? And so people were curious. They wanted to know, how do I use these? So it was a class on how to use commercially prepared herbs. They loved it so much, they asked for a level 2. And so we did a level 2 where we talked about how to evaluate herbal blends that are in the market to figure out what they're good for. And again, I had a lot of people who took those classes who went on to become lay-trained herbalists, helping friends and family. Designed and taught the Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Levels 1 and 2 courses. For a few years, I was a certified prenatal educator, so I designed and taught antenatal classes. That was a lot of fun. I still have a passion for fertility and pregnancy work. And most recently, I have created an IPA-approved iridology course called the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System. This course includes, if you're familiar with IPA, the International Iridology Practitioners Association, this course includes all of the curriculum that is required for Level 1 and Level 2 to prepare students for certification as iridologists. So stay with me to the end, and we'll just do a brief commercial, maybe if we've got time, about the upcoming course. So what changes? Let's get into this right. Let's get right into this now. You ready? Give me a thumbs up or give me an oh yeah in the comments if you want to look at some eyes and learn about how eyes change. You ready? Yes, please. Oh, Tanya, thank you so much. Thank you. And that is, I love the politeness instead of the oh yeah, yes, please. Thank you, Tanya. Love that. Pigment. Pigment is a huge thing. And Anka, yes, thank you for saying you want it too. Yes. Pigment may become acquired or become more dense. Now, I've seen a lot of instances in this, and you're going to see cases on Facebook where it says you can wash pigment out of the eye with diet and herbs, and I'm here to tell you that doesn't happen. All right, so let's look at this. These are my husband's eyes. The image on the left, again, was taken with my very first iridology camera, which was a print film camera. And I know the flash here. And I want you to look really, really carefully down here between about 30 minutes and about 35 minutes. So this was taken when he was, it was taken about, 30 years ago. And there isn't anything different in here. Look at this one. This was taken when I got that new 24 megapixel camera. Look at what's in here. This is pigment. This has acquired. So what does this tell us? What does this tell us? Okay, as we look for other differences, the pupil size is different. That has to do with the intensity of the lighting. We would always want to assess pupil size in normal room lighting before we used it as a guide for anything. But when we look at the fact that there was no pigment here years ago, and now there is pigment here, we need to understand a few things. The first thing we need to understand is that different colors of pigment mean different things. Okay, so when we see this, which in his eyes is a very dark, a dark brown, almost a black splattery look, that tells us liver. That tells us that since from here to here, his liver is activating. There is some kind of a weak link that is activating. All right. When we look at the placement of this, we look to see on an iridology map, we look to see what organ reaction fields are sitting in here. And that's going to tell us which organs are going to be impacted by the liver having a hissy fit. Right? And so when we look at this, it's important for us then to ask questions about liver and to understand which organs are likely to be impacted here and ask questions about those organs. Depending on what kinds of symptoms we are seeing and that this client is experiencing, we may need to support the organs that are being affected, but we will absolutely want to support the liver because the liver is the problem. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Hello, Maria. It's good to see you again with us on the live webinar. Does that make sense? That we would want to offer the biggest support on going through diet, herbs, and lifestyle to the organ that has placed the pigment in the eye, but we may also need to support the organs that are being impacted by it. Now, if you know your anatomy and physiology, you know that the liver does over 500 different jobs. Could it affect any of the organs that actually are sitting in these reaction fields? Absolutely it could. Absolutely. Because it does 500 different jobs, and those jobs are all related to other things that have to happen in the body. When we talk about the liver as being our primary organ of detoxification, that is a very narrow view of what the liver does, and we need to understand everything the liver does. Well, as much as we can. Everything is maybe pretty big if you're not a liver specialist, right? All right. Look at these images again. So these again are the same person. This was taken with that original iridology camera that was a film camera. This is taken with a 24 megapixel with an LED light. So that original incandescent light, right? Not quite as bright, so the pupils stayed larger. But we would also always want to assess that in terms of normal room lighting as well, because the pupil size does tell us a lot, or can tell us a lot about what is going on right now. Now, we also want to look and see what are the similarities. I mean, these eyes look pretty different, but they really are the same person. So let's see if we can find markings, landmarks that are going to connect us. We've got a small lacuna right here that is showing up here. Okay. We've got a trabecula that is wandering down here, and it is right here. So those are unique enough that we can use those as our identifiers to say, yep, this is the same person, this is the same eye. When we look at the more recent image, and these photos were taken about 20 years apart again, we see that we have a pigment here at, that would be at about what, about 41 minutes. We've got a pigment here at about 30, 35, 38 minutes. We've got a pigment here sitting at about, what, 15, 20, about 23 minutes. And we have a little bit of pigment sitting right in here as well. When we look at these eyes, at his original eye, we don't see that one pigment that was sitting in here. We don't see the same degree of pigment sitting close to the collarette as far as this brown little bit of pigment goes. We also don't see this big one, which would be down around here. We see what could be, well, actually that other pigment that we saw right here would be right around in here. So over 20 years, this client has developed all of this pigment. So what does this mean? Again, the color here is brown on all of these. So for this client, it's saying liver wants to have an attitude problem and it wants to affect other things. When we look at this exact location, well, here it's the liver shooting itself in the foot because this is a liver reaction field. Over here, we've got other organs. We're not going to go into huge detail on those today, but this is saying liver wants to affect these other organs as well. This is not the buildup of toxins. None of the extra color in this blue eye are the buildup of toxins. All of this other pigment he was born with, it's genetic. This is my son. I know what my diet was like when I was pregnant with him, and it was not junk food, I assure you. But these are also not the accumulation of toxins. These have a genetic base. Most pigment has a genetic base. This tells us his liver was genetically programmed to start triggering things later on in life, which it did, right? We see nothing here. 20 years later, we see this. And so as we look at this, we want to be asking questions that correlate to liver function. Has he noticed any particular issues digesting fats? Are his bowel movements greasy? How's his immune system? Does his hemoglobin hold well? Does he get a lot of skin outbreaks? These all seem like disjointed questions, but again, when you understand what the liver does, you understand that they all tie back to different liver functions. And then as we come and we look at where a pigment is sitting in other areas, we would ask questions about those particular organs and how they're functioning. And from there, we would then create a list, a protocol of effective dietary, herbal, lifestyle changes that he could implement. It might be as simple as suggesting that he increase his leafy green intake to 4 to 5 ounces a day. It might be suggesting that he do other dietary modifications. I'm always careful to not go too heavy on the recommendations because I find that if I give too many, they don't get done. I would rather my client made a couple of solid changes now and a few more solid changes a month down the road, and that we build the program gradually and give the client time to adapt their lifestyle and their habits to the new way of doing things. All right, so Tanya is saying when I asked, does this make sense earlier, that it did. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate you weighing in on that. Another change, this ring coming around the eye has gone by many names over the years. We call it in constitutional iridology, we call this a lipemic diathesis. Now, this one is not an iris sign. It's in the cornea, which is the layer in front of the iris. And the cornea absorbs fats from the bloodstream. And that's exactly what this is. This is the kinds of lipids that circulate in the bloodstream. So heaven forbid someone should be born with this. It used to be we didn't see anything like this until someone was 60 or 70 years of age. Now we're starting to see, not to this extent, but we're starting to see the early development of these in people as young as their 20s. Okay, so this again develops with time. It may become more opaque. It may start out just as a little edge and gradually get wider and gradually move its way around and totally circumnavigate the eye. The age of onset is what's most important here, because this can also be aging of the cornea. Okay, so if we see the edge of one of these developing and the person's only in their 20s, we're going to have a conversation about their lipids about how they handle carbohydrates, about how their liver functions, about what their diet and lifestyle are, about what supplements they take. If we see this fairly pronounced anywhere between the ages of 20 and 60, we're still going to have those kinds of conversations. If we're seeing this in a client for the first time and the client is over 70, we'll ask those questions because we want to know, is this actually a physiological thing coming from internally, like the liver and the pancreas, or is this natural aging of the cornea for this person, right? And so we need to ask questions. We need to know, when did this start? Sometimes if you're seeing a client for the first time and they're in their 70s, they'll go, well, I think I've always had it, which we know they haven't, because that would be so unusual that they would be like 1 in a billion. And so if they think they've always had it, it's been there for a long time, and we want to pursue the line of questioning that is the long time line of questioning, right? When we're doing this again, we want to remember that this is not going to dissolve. We can put this person on the cleanse of cleanses. We can do liver support. We can do dietary changes. We can do everything that will correct an unbalanced lipid profile. This, however, will not dissolve because the cornea is not going to give it back. It's not going to pump this back into circulation to get rid of it. So we're never going to expect this to disappear because it's not going to do that. Alrighty, so as we continue on, do you have any questions about anything we're talking about today? And those of you who've just joined me, hello, good to see you. Love to know who you are, especially if you're on Facebook. Would love to know who's with us there. Another thing that can happen is the pupil shape. I'll move my picture there. The pupil shape may change. The pupil shape is not genetically dictated. The pupil shape teaches us about spinal misalignments or subluxations. So when a pupil has a flattened aspect to it, we know that something physiologically internally has been out of line for a long time. So the spine has been misaligned for a long time, and that is going to affect organ function, right? We don't know if it's the spine went out of alignment first and that affected organ function, or if the organ function became unbalanced and that affected the nervous system and that pushed the spine out of alignment. Now, because this is not inherent, this can be changed. So Anka is asking a great question. Are there any other colors of the pigmentation that can be linked to organs as brown is assigned to the liver? Yes. We won't get into huge detail on all of them today, but certainly even white in an eye, yellow, orange, red, rust, black, all have different understandings as far as organ assignments for the organ of origin, and give us a deeper understanding of the body. That's a brilliant question, Anka. Thank you for asking that question. So coming back to our pupil shape, again, this is not inherent, this is earned. And so when we see a flattened pupil, we need to ask questions about the spine and about the related organs. So whatever organs are up here and whatever organs are opposite. This is called adjacent. This is called opposite. And we need to understand what's happening in those organs to understand, could the organs have been what caused the spinal misalignment? Right? And so then when we see this, we know we've got a couple of different levels we need to work on. We need to be recommending dietary, lifestyle, supplemental things. We also need to suggest that they seek some kind of spinal care, whether it's osteopathy or chiropractic or Dorn therapy or some other like Bowen, or just anything that could help realign the spine and help bring the organs back into balance could be very, very important here. We will often see blood vessel changes in the sclera. So When we look at this sclera, we've seen this eye before, right? We've seen him before. We look at this blood vessel down here, and this is from March 2018. And we don't see as much of it here, but what we do see is not anywhere near as thick or heavy. I also want you to look in the upper corner here. We have what I call the Harry Potter blood vessel. Can you see this? That's like the Harry Potter scar. And we have this coming along here. But we don't have the Harry Potter blood vessel over here. So these blood vessels have changed. Now, why would this be important? When we see blood vessels changing, this is dynamic. This is what's happening in the body. This is what's going on right now. 9 times out of 10, it's what the person has done to themselves. And so while the iris is inherent, the sclera is much more dynamic, and the sclera will change more quickly. So when we see blood vessels that are beginning to come up, we can from there ascertain where should we be focusing our energies to prevent problems, to reverse things that are probably subclinical. But if we watch these blood vessels continuing to develop on subsequent appointments, and I usually suggest for iridologists that they do a good assessment at least once a year of their clients, and if they've got a camera, shoot the photos once a year. This tells us if things are progressing, and if they are, we know we need to hop in there and get busy and do some things to correct the issues. So modern day constitutional iridologists look at more than just the iris. We're looking at the pupil shape, and we're looking at the sclera as well. So what are some ways that irides do not change? Now, way back when the earth was young and grass was green, when I first started doing North American iridology, we were taught that when you see, get my cursor back here, when you see lines like this in an opening like this, these meant healing was happening. And that we were taught that more of these would appear in that opening as the healing happened. We now know that is not accurate. We now know the iris itself is made up of layers of fiber. When we have an opening like this that we call a lacuna, we are actually looking at fibers that are in a lower layer. So we are not going to see healing lines appear. We're just simply looking down one layer here. This is not going to change shape. It's not going to close off. It's always going to be there. Lacunae do not get smaller. So those of you who might have some background in iridology, you might call these lesions, or you might call them lacunae. And Anka, I will answer that question for you in just a moment. These openings or lacunae do not change. They do not get smaller. This is the same eye. These first pictures were taken back to back with this camera, the one that has the incandescent ring flash. And I had just gotten my new 24 megapixel camera, and I wanted to do some comparison photos. So we did one photo and immediately did the next one. Now I want you to notice how it looks like these lacunae have changed. Okay, slight change where it looks like the image here, the lacunae is wider from side to side and shorter from top to bottom. But look at what happens here with a brighter light, which makes the pupil smaller. This lacuna is much wider and it's much shorter from top to bottom. So let me explain why this is. The fiber structure in the iris, these fibers are a set length, and they are anchored in at the outer edge, and there's more anchors on the inner edge. And so what happens when the pupil is large is these fibers get compressed as if it was an accordion. So when you've got an accordion, if this is an accordion and you've squeezed the accordion together, you now have the bellows on the accordion is very zigzaggy. and it's going to make things like this appear differently. What does the bellows look like if we stretch it out? The pleats are not going to be so deep. It's going to look like the surface of the bellows has changed texture. Okay, so these do not change size or shape, as in permanently. They only appear changed based on the pupil size. That makes sense? I like to think of this as like a balloon that is used to make those party animals. And when you squeeze it in one area, you haven't changed the amount of air it's holding. You've only temporarily modified the shape because you squeezed it. Anka says, and she says that makes sense. Thank you, Anka. She asks, is it possible for the blood vessels to change because of the level of tiredness in the person? They always represent a deeper problem. The blood vessels in the sclera are extremely transient. You actually know this if you've had a good hard cry and you went and looked at your eyes and they were really bloodshot. You know, you splash some cool water on your face, dry your face off, give yourself an hour, things calm down. So they can be very transient. So, for example, you wake up after a bad night's sleep, you look at your eyes and your eyes look like, oh my goodness, that's not good, right? But you get a better sleep the next night and those blood vessels calm down. Absolutely. So what we are looking for here is not those transient things that resolve within a day or two. We are looking for things where we're tracking the development over time, and we see it one way today, 6 months later, it's heavier. 6 months later, it's heavier. And along the way, again, we're asking questions. If we see that blood vessel getting heavier, we're going to ask questions about the related organ and organ function. We're going to look for other symptoms to see if we can ascertain. We might even send the client for lab tests, send them back to their doctor to get lab tests so that we can ascertain if there is something subclinical going on. All righty. So that is really, really important that we recognize that the eyes do change, but they don't change because we cleansed. They don't change because we took an expensive supplement. They change because they're genetically programmed. Now, there are some cases where noxious substances can temporarily change an eye color. I understand that from clients that I've got whose husbands are in the military, that when they go and they get that full barrage of inoculations that they have to get if they're going overseas, that sometimes the eye color will change dramatically for a few days, and then it'll fade back to whatever the regular color was. And I don't understand the chemistry of that, but it's not a permanent change. All right, so with that, again, we can use the eyes to help us see what the genetic patterns and tendencies are in the body. When we correlate what we see in the eye rods with our clients' symptoms and their concerns, then we understand what questions we need to ask to get deeper information, to get the right information to begin creating a protocol, correct? We understand that the sclera can be very transient, so we need to understand, is our client in a transient situation? Have they just had a good cry? Is that why their blood vessels are all incredibly out of whack? And when we understand that, we'll also then understand, are there questions we need to ask beyond, have you just had a good cry, to understand what those subclinical things or things that have been longstanding that have become clinical are. So now that you've had a taste of iridology, is it okay with you if I spend just like 3 minutes introducing the program that we've got? So, and Anka is asking, so only the persistent ones may represent a problem? Yes, yeah, which is certainly one of those breathe a sigh of relief things, right? Absolutely. All right, so the Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology is the only live, online, fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. This is a hold your hand, make sure you're understanding iridology course. This isn't a do-it-yourself course. And we do this because so many holistic practitioners see the client, then they go and they spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours creating protocols, and they're not getting paid for that client protocol time. When they understand iridology and how to use it effectively, they can do the assessment and the protocol design right when they're with their client. So it saves time. It increases their income because it means they can see more clients if they want. And because you've created the client's protocol in the session, the protocol is not going to be overwhelming. If you spent 2 or 3 or 4 hours doing an assessment and creating a protocol, you're probably giving your client too much information for them to implement easily. So if you want to learn more than just what the iris markers are, if you want to learn how the iris markers play off each other, if you actually also want to be mentored in creating your client programs, and if you want long-term support and mentoring after the course is done, I'm inviting you to join me for a webinar, which will be happening on September 30th. And I just need to double check that date because I didn't write it down. Yeah, September 30th at 4 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So that's 5 hours after what we started today. And we're going to go over what's included in the course and how the course can benefit you. And so it's not even a sales pitch. You won't even need your checkbook or your Visa or your credit card because there won't be anything for sale in that course. It's just an information session about the course. The goal of the course is to teach you constitutional iridology and how you can confidently use it and integrate it with what you already know about nutrition and herbology to create programs that your clients can actually stick with, but to get your work done while you're actually in your paid client sessions. Here's what just one of my graduates said. She said, and this is Sharon Bimrose. She is a naturopath in Australia. She'd already taken iridology as a part of her naturopathy studies, but she said the course Dynamic Iridology surpassed her previous training in structure, content delivery, documentation, and support. Iridology has certainly reduced the time required for prioritizing a treatment plan. And without a doubt, it's been a huge game changer. And Zaziltot, I'm sorry if I keep saying that wrong, would like the details for that webinar. Thank you. I will get that to you. Thank you so much for asking. And for those of you who want to join us for that webinar, just let me know. Shoot me a private message, or you can reach me on Instagram at iridology.education. That's my Instagram page. And you can also ask to join us on the Facebook group, Dynamic Iridology Assessment System for Holistic Health Professionals. Right? And those are other places where you can stay in touch with me and get more access to some of these free trainings and learn more about the course. And so Anka, no, we've answered that one already, Anka, and I already did, and you know it, so that's great. And I'm not saying that to diss you at all. It's just I read it and I went, oh, do I need to answer this? No, I don't, because we've done it already. So thank you so much for being with me. And again, you can shoot me a PM or a DM or reach out to me on one of my platforms if you would like information about the upcoming information session. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for asking questions. I love answering questions, and I've really had fun today. I hope you've enjoyed our time together as well. And I look forward to speaking with you and sharing more information with you again in the near future. Bye for now.